I want to spend a few minutes talking about Israel and the surrounding region and whether that sense of hope exists even today in a region which too often in the media is presented as an unremitting, unrelenting conflict. And my answer is, there too there is hope. You know, it's not the kind of contrived hope that a speaker seeks to manufacture for an audience because in certain cities, including this one, we like happy endings. I believe in hope because I believe at the end of the day in several core principles. The first principle is that the Jewish people did not reestablish the state of Israel in 1948 against the backdrop most immediately of the Shoah, the Holocaust, against the backdrop of the price of the lack of sovereignty and statehood that cost so many European Jews their lives because there was no Israeli flag flying in any consulate or any embassy anywhere in the world to offer refuge. Those Jews, the survivors of the Holocaust, those Jews, like my wife and her family, the forgotten refugees, the hundreds of thousands of Jews from Arab countries who were expelled from their ancestral lands, who never interested the media much, who never attracted a single UN resolution, not a one, who never drew an outcry from the international community. Sad to say. But then again, what's new? Jews are on the move. Those Jews who arrived in Israel and those Jews who made it from the communist bloc, from Bulgaria after the war, from other countries subsequently, those Jews did not come to Israel to despair. They did not come to Israel as their final resting place, but as their final living place. And to me, the very story of Israel, stripped of all of its media theatrics, above all is the remarkable story of a battered people who, wherever they were and whatever they experienced, always dreamed of a return. Because to those Jews, you cannot remove the land from the faith and the people. The three are inextricably linked. And that's why I'm optimistic about Israel's future, because those Jews who came and who settled and who built and who thrived are there to stay. And they have faced whatever adversity was thrown at them in more than most countries. Every attempt of war, of boycott, of secondary boycott, of tertiary boycott, of UN resolutions, of attempts to isolate, Israel overcame every single one. So I'm bullish. I'm bullish because that same Israel, when it experienced the wave of terror, particularly between 2000 and 2003, when you read every second and third day that the Sbarro Pizzeria in Jerusalem was blown up, that a Seder in Netanya was targeted and attacked one after another, when they went for the Dolphinarium, the discotheque on Tel Aviv's coast, and they killed 20 or 21 young people going to dance, the very next day, scrawled on what was left of that building, someone had written, "They will not prevent us from dancing." That's a country destined to live. And it's that same country in 2006, during the war with Hezbollah in Lebanon, which at the very same time, and I saw this with my own eyes, when we brought an AJC solidarity delegation simply to identify ourselves with the destiny of Israel as rockets flew from Lebanon. And we went to the Rambam Hospital in Haifa. You had this remarkable sight of the sirens going off and the entire hospital staff rushing into the bomb shelters together with visitors like us. And when the sirens went off, those very same staff went back to the emergency room and to the wards and to the research laboratories and resumed their work saving lives. The lives of Arabs and Muslims and Jews alike, without distinction, in those laboratories studying stem cell research and cancer and heart disease to advance life for all, including those in Lebanon who are firing the missiles. That country is destined to survive. That country is destined to thrive. And that's why I'm bullish on Israel and its future. And more practically, Moses wandered for 40 years, and we joke that he wandered either because, being a chauvinistic male, he refused to ask for directions, or because it took him 40 years to find the one piece of land in the region that didn't have oil. Well, we've got to get rid of that material, because, hallelujah, Israel has found gas and oil, and in abundance. That too is a reason why Israel will continue to thrive, but the beauty of that discovery is that it came 60 years and more after the creation of the state, when the state had to depend on human capital and not natural resources to develop. And that's why Israel today is a member of the OECD. That's why Israel today has won more Nobel Prizes than most countries in the world, including many with far larger populations. That's why in every field of human endeavor, including every visit to the hospital and every use of the cell phone and every use of the computer, there's Israeli input, because human capital was unleashed. That country will survive and thrive, so yes, I'm bullish. But I'm not oblivious, of course, to the region in which Israel lives. And here too, I want to say that while there are endless challenges, in fact, I can't think of another country more challenged, although there are many with their challenges, than this tiny state no bigger than the state of New Jersey. Here too, I'm not ready to succumb to a sense of despondency or despair, not at all. For one thing, I honor the memory of Anwar Sadat. Let's remember something. Anwar Sadat, and I'm so pleased that the Deputy Consul General of Egypt is among the distinguished diplomats here tonight, and Walid, you are here. Good evening to you, sir. Anwar Sadat, let us remember, did not one day in 1977 wake up as a Philo-Semite and a card-carrying member of AJC. I wish. Anwar Sadat understood something else. He understood that Egyptian forces had fought valiantly in 1973 in what we, not you, call the Yom Kippur War. And they had given a good showing of themselves, and now he thought it is time to think about the future of Egyptian children and give them an opportunity. And Anwar Sadat eventually paid with his life, but not before he traveled on that momentous day in 1977 to Jerusalem, to Israel's capital. The capital that most countries in the world will still not inexplicably recognize, but he recognized it. By traveling and speaking at the Knesset, he recognized it, he acknowledged it. And his speech was not all peace and love and softness. It was a tough speech, but it didn't matter, He had broken the psychological barrier. And the message of Anwar Sadat was, I recognize your existence. Now let's sit down and negotiate. And negotiate they did. And they achieved a deal. And it's a deal that endures to this day through all the tumult in the region, including the recent events in Egypt. There will be another Anwar Sadat. Even if tragically he paid with his life for his moral courage, there will be another Anwar Sadat for whom the future of his children will count far more than the destruction of our children. And then came King Hussein, brave King Hussein of Jordan. In this case, it was a bit different because there had always been a quiet de facto partnership between Jordan and Israel. But he came out of the closet in 1994 and achieved peace. And both sides have held to their obligations, as has been the case with Egypt. There will be another King Hussein who understands that his priority must be the future of his own country and not the destruction of neighboring Israel. So in that sense, I'm optimistic. And I'm optimistic because when the Israeli people saw Anwar Sadat emerge and King Hussein come out of the closet, Israel responded. No one can question the lengths to which Israel was prepared to go to make peace with Egypt. The Sinai is 3 times bigger than the state of Israel itself. It was relinquished. The Sinai meant strategic depth for Israel, a country that suddenly had become bigger than New Jersey. Those bases were dismantled. The Sinai meant discovery of oil, which at that point Israel did not otherwise have. The oil wells were relinquished. And Menachem Begin himself, the prime minister, who had publicly pledged that when he retired, he would move to Yamit, a settlement in the Sinai, and write his memoirs. That same Menachem Begin, in the interest of shalom, salam, peace, ordered the evacuation of the Sinai, including his beloved Yamit. That Israel will be ready for the next Anwar Sadat and the next King Hussein, I have no doubt. Because we Jews have not embraced peace as a Madison Avenue slogan. For those who understand the Jewish tradition, the pursuit of peace, the search for peace, is at the core of who we are and have been since the days of Isaiah the prophet. Lo yisagoy el goy cherev, lo yilmadu on milchama. The prophet Isaiah said, a nation shall not lift up sword against nation, nor shall they learn war anymore. That is our DNA. But, and it's a big but, not peace at any price, not a false peace, not a short-term peace. No nation, and certainly not Israel, can afford that risk. And so Israel needs to assess carefully, because a wrong decision based on false assumptions or the triumph of hope over reality could spell damage, if not destruction, for this state, 2/3 the size of mighty Belgium. 2/3. And so we have, as we make a brief tour d'horizon, we have in Gaza a region which in 2005 was given its first chance in history for self-government. Never before had it had that chance. Not under Israeli occupation, not under Egyptian military occupation, and not before under the various layers of occupation by others. And Gaza had a fundamental choice. Do we replicate Singapore, or do we replicate Somalia? And they chose. And in choosing, they ousted the Palestinian Authority and replaced them with Hamas rule, and they chose Somalia. And why not Singapore? For those of us who've been to Singapore, what a model of development on a space no bigger than Gaza, and with no natural resources, only human capital. Because to the leaders of Hamas, as the charter says, our goal is the destruction of Israel more than the construction of Gaza. What a shame. And one day we may hope that there will be those in Gaza who say, enough. It's time for us to aspire to Singapore. Syria, let's all remember, because sometimes there are those who don't. From far, people may shed tears, be they genuine or crocodile, about what's going on in Syria. But Syria is Israel's immutable neighbor. It won't change. And forgive me, but if this is what President Assad is prepared to do to his own people, dare I ask, what might he do to Israel given half a chance? That is Israel's neighbor. And there's no dancing around the nature of that regime or the increasingly dangerous opposition, which may earlier on have had its moderate elements who have now been overwhelmed by Sunni radical Al-Qaeda-linked Islamists. And here I dare say we too as a nation may have made one or two errors in judgment. I understand that it's easy from the outside when you don't have the burden of decision making to second guess. And I certainly don't mean to be smart alecky. But from where we sat, the decision of the President of the United States, first of all, to draw a red line and then to blink, was a most disappointing decision. And many read into the decision an American retreat. And among those who were reading into the decision, I suspect, were the leaders in Iran, who may have concluded from that important moment, when the blink or the flinch occurred, that the American military option against Iran, for practical purposes, was a bluff. Now, I, for one, do not advocate military action against Iran. Let me be clear. AJC has never advocated military action against Iran. However, our strategy on Iran, over 15 years of travel to every major capital in the world, 15 years, thousands of meetings, from Tokyo to Seoul, from Beijing to Moscow, from New Delhi to Berlin, from Paris to London, from Brussels to Washington, from Mexico City to Brasilia, and keep circling the world, and I haven't mentioned at least 180 member states of the UN. Our message has always been consistent, and I continue to believe it's been the right message. To avoid a military conflict with Iran, whether led by the United States or Israel, you need to have two essential components. The first, ever-tightening sanctions. Make sure that Iran understands that its refusal to abide by UN Security Council resolutions and by the International Atomic Energy Agency reports comes with a steepening price. And number two, maintain a credible military option. Ironically, the best way to avoid war is to be prepared for war. To convince the Iranians that we mean what we say. And the Iranians, at the end of the day, may or may not seem rational to us, but they are, in their own minds, not suicidal, even with their Shiite eschatology. But we blinked. And instead of convincing the Iranians that we are indeed prepared to go to war, and remember, from 1980 to 1988, Iran and Iraq fought a bloody war where more than 1 million people were killed, and they fought it to a standstill. The United States in 2003, whether you approved or disapproved of the war, for this point doesn't matter, walked into that same Iraq, led by the same Saddam Hussein, and wiped him out in a matter of days. Iran is not stupid. That American military machine could have been turned on Iran just as the crippling sanctions were taking effect. And the question we have to ask is, did we rush too quickly to an interim deal? Now, that's a politically inconvenient question, because how dare anyone, including in this case AJC, suggest that we not embrace a deal that offers a way out? Yes, we embrace a deal that offers a way out. But is it really a way out? Or is it a bit of a mirage? After all, if you saw on the Sunday after the signing in Geneva, the scene on CNN's Candy Crowley, ABC's George Stephanopoulos, the Secretary of State of the United States, telling the viewing audience, this agreement, signed in Geneva, does not authorize Iranian enrichment of uranium. Meanwhile, back in Tehran, the foreign minister Zarif was telling Iranian audiences, with the world listening in, of course, that this agreement, in its 4 pages, in 2 separate places, recognized Iran's right to enrich uranium. Well, one of them has to be wrong. Take your pick. So my question is not whether we should be seeking a deal. Of course we should be seeking a deal. But we have to be seeking a deal where we abide by what we believe. Iran should not have the right to enrich uranium and maintain its nuclear infrastructure, because it has demonstrated to the world again and again that this is not a peaceful plan. It has lied and deceived and cheated again and again. It has hidden facilities. And meanwhile, even as we focus on the details of the interim deal, what about its ballistic missile development? Is that too for peaceful nuclear energy? A ballistic missile development program? And what about its capacity to weaponize? So we're still a long way from shouting victory. A long way. And I pray for the good sense and the reason and the strength and the smarts of those 7 actors, the P5, the Permanent 5, plus Germany. Germany being represented here tonight by both its Consul General and Deputy Consul General, and Catherine Ashton on behalf of the EU structure. I pray for their wisdom and strength in getting this right. We know, and I suspect the Consul General of Azerbaijan knows even better, because his country borders on Iran. And 40% of the population of Iran today is of Azeri nationality, including its supreme leader, Khamenei. That Iran represents very shrewd negotiation. He knows, we know, that Iran continues to be engaged in global terrorism. We know about the attempted attacks in Baku. We know about the attempted attacks elsewhere, nor have we forgotten the 2 attacks in Buenos Aires in 1992 and 94. We know that Iran supports Hezbollah. We know that Hezbollah is part of Assad's killing machine in Syria. We need to see a tangible change of behavior. Let's be sure we sequence this right. It's payment on performance, not payment on pledge of performance, as we see it. But finally, and with this I close, I'm hopeful for a different reason, even in the midst of this complex regional environment. And I say it ever mindful that there are several EU member states represented here tonight: Austria, Bulgaria, Croatia, Germany, Poland among them. I'm hopeful because at the end of the Second World War, on the ruins and ashes of the Jewish people and much of Europe, there were dreamers with names like Robert Schuman, the French foreign minister, and Jean Monnet, his aide, and Paul-Henri Spaak of Belgium, and subsequently in Germany, Der Alte, Konrad Adenauer, and in Italy, Alcide de Gasperi, and in Britain, my personal hero, Winston Churchill, who decided that on the tail of war, they had to come up with a different architecture for peace. Not the League of Nations, ill-fated as it was, but what became the European Union. It began with 6 countries built around coal and steel. But the genius of the European Union was its effort to integrate countries, and particularly France and Germany, to prevent any future prospect of war on Europe's blood-stained soil. And they succeeded brilliantly. My fear is that in today's world, people look at the EU and they think of Euroscepticism and Euro paralysis and Eurozone crisis. And obviously those are issues worth considering. But the EU itself is the most ambitious and successful peace project in modern history. And the prospect of war on Europe's soil is over. It's ended. There is no border between France and Germany today, at least one where those of us who like to get stamps in our passports can get them. The Eurozone for me is not about the crisis alone. The Eurozone for me is about the integration of France and Germany. For me, that model will one day apply to the Middle East. Therein lies my hope. And I want to end on this note of hope, that just as it seemed improbable on May 9th, 1945, the day after VE Day, that we could ever talk about France and Germany as partners and friends, and Europe as an integrated community, I'm saying that one day people will look back and say, however improbable it seemed, there were leaders in the Middle East, in the Arab countries, in Israel, that said, enough of the cycles of war and conflict. We want to be like Europe. We don't want to be like Somalia. And the only way for us to become like Europe is to embrace true democracy, true civil society, true cooperation, and true visioning. And on that note, I offer my message of hope. Thank you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.